Hello there, YouTube. Devin here again, and today I have, well, kind of half of a uniform review video for you, and that would be on the third pattern, both Class 1 and Class 2. We'll get into that. American jungle fatigues from the Vietnam armed conflict, otherwise known as the Vietnam War, to the United States. The war of aggression to a lot of different people. Needless waste of human life and resources for basically no reason, where a first world country was beating up a third world country and then somehow actually lost to even more people. A war that was so bad, well, an armed conflict that was so bad and so one-sided, it caused Sweden to get mad at the United States and actually aid the North Vietnamese, which is another cool story within itself. But whichever way you view it, depending on where you are in the world, for those who don't know, it was a horrendous conflict and had a huge tipping point in kind of how the U.S. changes their uniforms and their gear. It influenced it so much that it's actually the second largest thing. God, what am I looking for here? The second largest change of gear and uniforms in U.S. history outside of World War II and the Global War on Terror. Those were massive, massive overhauls as far as stuff goes, like for uniform changes and stuff. But Vietnam falls right behind those two as far as how equipment would come, and you would see these uniforms come out of this. So I'm currently wearing the Class 2 Generation 3 jungle fatigues right now. And basically how you could tell the Class 2 generation jungle fatigues from the regular jungle fatigues is the presence of camouflage. Those of you who don't know, this is a green dominant ERDL pattern Type 3 jungle fatigue. It's very, very comfortable, nice 100% cotton, stuff like that. So for this uniform review, I know this is one that a lot of you guys wanted to see from me for quite a while, despite the fact not being a Vietnam expert. So you're getting a lot of stuff here that I'm not an expert in, but I know enough about these to kind of help make it a little bit easier and do kind of a cool comparison between both the Class 1s, the Class 2s, and what replaced them both, actually. My favorite uniform, the BDUs, which actually looks like the brown dominant version of this pattern, because I'm actually wearing the green dominant version of this pattern, the Erdls, which is what the BDUs are based off of. So, I don't have the trousers and or pants, depending on where you are in the world, to review with this video. As most of you guys know who are Vietnam collectors, pants are incredibly hard to find in original condition. Neither of these, any of these are reproductions, so they are really, really hard to find, especially if I'm going to review a uniform. I kind of like to wear it around and use it for at least a week to be able to tell, you know, how the fit and feels, where the pinches, where the binds are in it, how good are the pockets to be used and stuff like that. And since it is so hard and so expensive to find a set of medium regular original jungle fatigue pants, I just decided to forego that, and we're only going to be reviewing the blouses today. So with that little caveat in mind, we're going to get into some basic history of the jungle fatigues, just scratching the surface. And please forgive me if I confuse something. There's a lot of variations of jungle fatigues and stuff like that. So the very first pattern of jungle fatigues would be introduced in 1963. That was before ripstop existed. It would be very similar to this uniform, actually, in a lot of ways. There wouldn't be too many changes in the layout of the uniform and the cut of the uniform for the most part. They would be pretty much universally the same with some minor changes and stuff like that. But how you can tell a Type 1 from a Type 2 and 3 are the presence of the epaulets. It would have epaulet straps on it. It would have exposed buttons on the pockets. It would have a gas flap in the front button closure of the uniform, and it would have little gathering tabs here on the side to kind of cinch your uniform in a little bit for a smarter look. The Type 2 would be different from the Type 1 because it would have non-exposed buttons, 2 pen pockets, 1 on each side, which is something that would carry over from the Generation 1s. Still have the epaulets, still have the cinches and stuff like that. But it would be made out of a heavier fabric because the Type 1 jungle fatigues were just basically disintegrating on your uniforms. In some instances, were only lasting a few days, 1 or 2 days. before they would basically be unusable. So they beefed up the fabric a little bit, and then with the Type 3s, you would see them, once again change a bunch of stuff. They would remove the epaulets, they would remove the pen pocket on the on the right breast pocket. There would be no little envelope of fabric sewn out to put your pens in, but it would be retained on the left breast pocket. Buttons are still unexposed. They would remove the waist cinches on the uniform on the Type 3s, and that's kind of the basics of how the Jungle Fatigues would look. And then you would see the Class 2, which is just a Type 3 Jungle Fatigue in camouflage. That's basically the ways you could tell all of those apart very, very easily without getting into like the nitpicky details. There is another version of the Class 3s that you will find most of the Class 3s in. The early Class 3s would not be in ripstop. They would be introduced in 1967, whereas the Class 2s would be 1965. The Type 1s would be 1963, the Type 2s would be 1965, and the Type 3 Jungle Fatigues, which are the most common Jungle Fatigues of Vietnam, would be introduced in 1967. But in 1968, they would introduce the ripstop version, which both of mine are ripstop versions, which means they are made post-1968. They are both Type 3s, and they are, one of them is a Class 1, and this one is a Class 2. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can finally get into kind of showing you some little differences. And for those of you who don't know, this is my regular Jungle Fatigue uniform. This is an original one. It's unissued. It does have a few little holes in it and mothing holes. It's probably made pretty late during the war because there is kind of some inconsistent stitching and stuff like that. Not like inconsistent for whatever, but you could tell it was made very, very, very quickly. And there is some panels of cloth in here that were used that weren't necessarily perfect. This isn't like mothing because you can tell that it's fabric that was damaged and then still made into a uniform. It's not something that was like ate off the uniform, which is kind of interesting. But from what I'm told, towards the end of the early 70s there, towards the end of the war, they were kind of just throwing these together as quick as they can. A lot of companies were to fulfill their contracts and everything and try to get out of them without getting hung with product towards the end of the war, which is something the U.S. has a big history of doing. When a conflict ends, if a big company has a contract with the government, they just say, we don't want them anymore. Sorry, you spend all the money tooling up and paying all those people to make the crap and stuff like that. So you would see that as a pretty common thing towards the end of the Vietnam War. So from everything I've read, could be false. That's a little caveat. So without further ado, we are now going to flip the camera around, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to compare the two blouses of the Jungle Fatigues, and then I'm going to take the Type 1, the Type 3 Class 1, which is the OG 107 100% cotton ripstop one, and compare it to the BDUs so we can get a variation of how it compares to the favorite uniform, which is also the uniform that replaced it, coincidentally. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty, so here we are with both of the Type 3 Jungle Fatigue uniforms. Here on the left, we have the Class 2 on the left, Class 1 on the right. They are both basically the same uniform, so to speak, other than the pattern almost exactly. So we, as we do it here, I'm going to try to bring all of the tags and the labels and all the little things that I'm trying to show you up to the camera a little more, because they are kind of hard to see from this far away, which is something I kind of realized, but I don't exactly have the right tripod to do this, so this is the point where I shout out all my Patreon supporters for really, really helping me out. You guys have turned this channel into what it is, even with the minuscule amount of money I get every month from you. The goal is for the end of this year would be to be at least 20 Patreons, which I believe we have hit, and $100 a month, which I could do a ton to this channel with $100 a month. So if that's something you consider, there will be a link in the description for you to follow. As little as $1 a month gets you into the Discord and all that other good stuff, which is where you can ask me as many questions if you want me to help you identify something or just show off something cool or anything like that, or have some advice on some projects and whatnot. The Discord's a really good way to do that. So $1 a month, and you can choose to be a subscriber for just 1 month if you would like. It all goes a long ways to really help the channel. So let's get into this here. So these are the same uniform. They are 4-button up the front. Well, 5 actually, but nobody ever really did up the top one. So 5-button closure. They're both 100% cotton ripstop, which is a very, very lightweight, very, very airy uniform. It's very, very nice. My Type 2s, as you can see here, my Class 2, sorry. I'm gonna say that wrong a lot because it's all the numbers and stuff. Has some holes in it and some other kind of like inconsistencies with how you would see towards the end of the war, how they would be making their uniforms not quite as good as they would at the beginning of the wars. They are pretty much exactly the same. This one is missing its use and care label, but you can see the remnants of where it was in the little square patch where it would have been sewn on, because these just have these really, really chintzy kind of cotton tags still, but it does still have the size tag and it is still readable with its stock number. So there it is, you know, medium regular, which is my size, which is perfect. So on the inside here, you can see where I meant to see the chest pocket. What I meant when I said the chest pocket, you can see this little gap in the slash pocket up on the left breast, and it would have this little extra bit of fabric sewn in here. You can see where the stitching is, not the extra little bit of fabric itself, but that's where you would put your pen and stuff so it wouldn't snag on anything else in your pocket, which is pretty neat, because on the other side, it doesn't have that. As you can see, you could just see the outline of the pocket there. It's a very, very good uniform. Here's a look at the pattern. The Class 2s would come in 2 different versions, the green dominant, which this is, and the brown dominant, which is actually what would go on to be the BDUs, so you'll get to see that a little bit later. I'll throw this on the screen just a little bit so you can kind of see the differences between the green dominant and the brown dominant. Now, I actually think that the green dominant is better for camouflage than the brown dominant, at least here in the United States, so... At least where I live, anyways, here in the United States. So, but that's the Type 2s. So they would have adjustable cuffs, you know, bellow pockets with button closures on everything. You could roll your sleeves up, button cuffs, button pockets. Slash pockets are basically the same, except the waist pockets are a little bit larger than the chest pockets. Other than that, it's just 100% cotton ripstop uniform. Nothing really too fancy or no thrills to it. It's a very, very loose cut, very, very baggy cut, so you get really good airflow, which for one helps in the heat and humidity of the jungle, and it also helps keep the uniform dry and keeps it from like clinging to you when you haven't bathed or washed regularly, such as in a conflict in the jungle. You're not going to, but it's going to help keep the uniform from like sticking to you, which is a really, really good feature a lot of people don't seem to realize. It is almost too baggy for me, though. I don't like how baggy this uniform is on me. I'm also a really tiny, scrawny person, so it's not exactly the best cut for me. I like something that's a little bit more gathered, a little bit more close to the body, because I really don't need 2 people's worth of uniform for somebody like me just to fit in my broad shoulders, you know? So... which kind of sucks, unfortunately, because my shoulders are so broad that I have to wear a medium. Other than that, I probably would fit into a small, which I'm guessing would be nicer. But according to how they would measure and fit their uniforms, I'd be a medium, which means I'm basically wearing a tent. So here you can see the adjustable cuffs on the OG 107 Jungle Fatigues Type 3 Class 1. Unlike the BDUs, there would be no button right here on the cuff to maintain the flap when you wanted it fully open for the best airflow, but there would be 2 closed adjusted positions, and this would carry over into the BDUs, obviously, as I will show you. Other than that, they are exactly the same. They are 100% cotton ripstop, 5-button closure. All the pockets are exactly the same, right down to the pen pocket and everything stitched into it. This one does have its use and care manual, though. So, as you can see here, Coatman's Combat, Ripstop Poplin OG 107 Class 100% Cotton. Instruction and care label, and as you see, this is an unissued one, which they're kind of hard to find, but it tells you exactly how to clean it, how to maintain the fabric. These were known to like fade and get really, really soft and almost like pajama-like after a few washes and with a little wear, which is really, really, really interesting. Once again, there is the size tag for you guys to read if you care to do so. It is still that weird kind of cotton tag before they would go to the paper tag that you would see on like a lot of the BDUs and stuff like that. So that's why these would pull out. These tags would kind of disintegrate over time and fade, much like the uniform would. These uniforms would not last all that long in the field for the most part. So finding them is getting very, very expensive, especially to all of you Vietnam collectors out there who understand how precious these things are in original configuration, and the fact that nobody really does any super fantastic, good reproduction uniforms. So now we're going to tick this one out here, the Class 2 camouflage Erdl uniform in green dominant, and we're going to replace it with a BDU, and we will compare the BDU to the Jungle Fatigues as far as fit and finish and everything goes like that. There's nothing really going on in the back of this uniform. It's overall very hard to see in the camera, so I'm just showing you guys, telling you it is a bell-shaped uniform, so it's kind of stitched to be gathered a little bit at the waist, and then it flares out towards the bottom of the uniform, towards the hem. So much like the early BDUs would, and later the BDUs would become much more square cut, and then they would evolve into the terrible amorphous blob that is the ACU, as a lot of you know. So stay tuned. We're going to switch over the uniforms here, and then to compare them together here. Alrighty, so here we are back with the BDUs here on the left and the Type 3 Jungle Fatigues here on the right, and I left just a little bit up there of the green dominant ERDL for you to see. So if I pull this down here so you can compare green dominant to brown dominant, and as you can see, this one's actually, it would have been much greener and less faded early on in its life, but you can see where it's actually much more green than the BDUs, which are based off the brown dominant version of the Erdls. So, but what we have here is basically, for all intents and purposes, a pretty similar uniform. The BDUs would be, the changes from the Type 3 Jungle Fatigues would be they'd be gathered a little bit. That would just to look a little bit more smart rather than be as baggy, because they didn't need to be as baggy anymore. They would be given reinforced elbows and reinforced knees on the pants and stuff like that the Jungle Fatigue uniforms, wouldn't have had. The pockets are now, as you can see, square, which looks much smarter, and everything like that. The nice, really squared off appearance of that. But other than that, they're pretty much the same collar, the lapel style collar, the 5 buttons that go up the front. The sleeves would be a little different because, like I said, on the BDUs here, they would add a button right here for the tab to be closed when the sleeve is all the way open, so you don't just have this extra flap of fabric wiggling around. That's something they didn't do on the Jungle Fatigues. Overall, though, the BDU is actually kind of a cheaper uniform. For the most part, it's not as ergonomic or as comfortable as the Jungle Fatigues, honestly. I don't think the uniform overall has any problems with the actual comfort while wearing it, but it has some kind of shortcomings that the Jungle Fatigues very clearly had. So the chest pockets here are only bellowed on the bottom and on the outside edge on the BDUs, whereas on the Jungle Fatigues they're bellowed basically all the way around, because the pockets are much more bulbous, and even though they're not bellowed here on the outside, they're bellowed here on the inside, which I think is actually much better because they're not going to catch on stuff as much here on the inside. But then they have this accordion bellow right here in the center, which means this pocket expands out a ton compared to the BDU pockets. And it's the same way down on the waist pockets. The waist pockets are bellowed 360 degrees around, so they can hold a ton more, whereas the waist pockets are only bellowed on one side here on the bottom of the BDUs. So they're only on the outside edge. That's it. That's the only bellow. And then they're hard sewn on the other two edges, which kind of is a waste of space because these pockets are not only bigger, even if they were hard sewn, but they're accordion bellowed here in the center, and then they're bellowed all the way around. So they're double bellowed. So you could fit so much more in these, and they're so much more ergonomic. Also, these pockets are angled ever so slightly. The chest pockets are, which it's much easier to get into an angled chest pocket than it is to get into a straight cut chest pocket. I don't know why they got rid of those, because the pockets on these are much better. Basically, they just copied the layout of the pockets. But the pocket design and how they were implemented in the uniform are so much better on the Jungle Fatigues than they are on the BDUs. But for all intensive purposes, they function as basically the same uniform. And you can see where the BDUs are very, very heavily derived from the Jungle Fatigue uniform and stuff like that. And, The jungle fatigues would be used from 1963 up until, through the 80s, basically. You can see them kind of into the late 80s and even some turning up kind of in the 90s. But in 1983, the BDUs would officially come out to start replacing the jungle fatigue uniforms. Jungle fatigue uniforms had a good run, service life of about 10 years, alongside another uniform, the OG 107, utility uniform, which would be used from 1952 until the 80s in one form or another. Other than changing the fabric, they would change the OG 507. But they would be used for a very, very, very long time. So, served alongside one of the longest serving uniforms of U.S. history that often gets overshadowed by this because of how often this has been used in TV and TV shows and video games and movies and stuff like that. This is a very iconic uniform that would represent basically an entire generation and an entire conflict, that being the Vietnam War. So, hopefully you learned something about these uniforms and all this other good stuff. Everything else like that. I hope I didn't mess up too much other than with some of the names and the types and the classes and all this other stuff. That stuff that I got confused. But you guys know what I mean, I hope. So, thank you all for watching. Hopefully you learned something in this video. All that other good stuff. And I'm going to go edit this now and hopefully get it out for you guys. I'm sorry I don't have the trousers to review for these as well. That'd be really, really cool. But I'm not shelling out $500 for a pair of cotton pants, essentially. It would be really, really nice eventually to try one out someday, and I didn't want to buy a reproduction to compare because it's not the same. So, thank you all for stopping by. Hopefully I will see all of you here in the next video. Hopefully you learned something from this. It was kind of just a basic overview, but hopefully now you get to see, the three most common versions and what replaced that. Sorry, the two most common versions and the third uniform that replaced it here compared right next to each other, and hopefully you can make out some cool differences and some other neat little instances and some similarities and stuff like that, because it's kind of neat to get them both together here to show that stuff. So stay tuned for the next video. I should be back on the normal schedule of giving you a video over the weekends and stuff like that, and just working super hard over the week. So after being sick for very, very, very sick for very, very long. So thank you all once again for stopping by, and I will see all of you here in the future. Bye-bye now.